I'm really happy to welcome Karen, Karen Birkel, Head of Division at the ECB, and the panelists. So the floor is yours, Karen.
Right, thank you very much, Eileen. And yes, please join us this morning at our fireside chat about non-time critical payments. Take your hot chocolate or any comfort drink that you like and hear the crackling noises of our fire and visualize the warm colors of our virtual fireplace. So today we're going to be diving into an interesting conversation with our very knowledgeable panel members that I'm going to be introducing you a little bit more. Dimitri already introduced them earlier on. But first of all, why are we here today with our panelists? We're going to discuss the benefits that non-time critical payments offer to PSPs. We have 24/7 availability with SCT Inst features and tips. So why should banks support non-time critical payments in tips, and which business cases? Now, Fabrizio mentioned a few business cases already, but we're going to be hearing from the panelists who are out there as PSPs in the business cases that are interesting for them for non-time critical payments. I'd like to introduce to you Carl Bengtzon, who works at the SEPA Treasury on development projects, both internally and externally. He covers the cash part of all the product areas globally for the SEB, and he has been in the banking industry for more than 20 years. Martijn, de Ruijter, the head of SEPA payments and payments transaction fraud at Rabobank. So you're responsible, Martijn, for product management and delivery related to SEPA products, including, of course, instant payments and a number of other related applications. You're also responsible or accountable as a risk and model owner regarding the external fraud and coordination of relevant policies and awareness. Now, last but not least, I'd like to also bring in Michael Knetsch this morning. Tribe Head of Instant Payments across the globe for the Deutsche Bank, ensures that the product stays on par with client expectations and driving the commercialization of the product. Before you joined Deutsche Bank, Michael, in 2019, you've been within the payments area also more than 20 years through, for example, the Royal Bank of Scotland, C2P Consulting, Logica Consulting, ABN AMRO, different roles in consulting, market management, product technology, and also in leading roles in strategy and innovation. So I'd like to welcome indeed my very knowledgeable panel today, and I have a few questions for each of you. And then we're going to take a look at the questions that are coming in from our viewers. Martijn, if that's fine, I'm going to start with you.
Of course.
In your market, Rabobank offers non-time critical payments. So given your experience, how does the flexibility offered by non-time critical payments contribute to making instant payments the true new normal in the market?
Well, thank you for your question, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Martijn de Ruijter, as mentioned before, and happy to be here. So to try to answer the question, the short answer would, well, it was actually already covered by Fabrizio. So it's best of both worlds, which allows for the introduction as a new normal. So non-time critical from our perspective allows us to enjoy the benefits both of the instant payment scheme, so the speed and availability, while also granting the certainty of the standard or old SEPA credit transfer scheme in terms of the payment not being rejected for not meeting a specific timeline. To start with a slightly longer answer, the Dutch community, as also mentioned, right at the start of the SEPA instant credit transfer implementation in 2019, decided to try and cater for the broadest implementation that we could, and this led to the viewpoint that some transactions are not as time critical as others, and that we could benefit both from the PSP perspective and the PSU or the payment service user perspective. So in other words, you could say that the flexibility of the non-time critical processing is by definition the key to its successful use. To highlight how this works, the way we implemented it at our institution is that we do not offer our users a choice between non-time critical or time critical. We just implemented the non-time critical perspective. We take it all the way. So it's important to realize, again, also mentioned by Fabrizio, this does not mean that we delay the transaction processing up to the point where we want to process, we try to process instantly in all cases, and we are able to do so in close to 100% of transactions. So in this way, again, the benefits are enjoyed in virtually all cases, unless there's a need to trigger the non-time critical element. So to zoom in on those elements quickly, Fabrizio mentioned some of the situations. So timeouts or technical issues could trigger a slight delay, and we felt that rejecting the payment is likely not to be in the best interest of the payment user or the payment service provider, as we might be able to process the payment after all in a matter of seconds or maybe minutes. Sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a little bit longer, but there's many cases it's just a very small delay. And having the non-time critical processing removes the obligation for a payment service user to reinitiate the payment, which is obviously a key concern to remove. This advantage applies in general, but it is most visible again in the cases also presented by Fabrizio, such as future dated payments or recurring payments. And going forward with the instant payment regulation, we would also see that for batch processing, a similar use case would apply. So long story short, again, summarizing, we've intended to use non-time critical processing as a measure to allow for the broadest implementation as we could. For us, it means we didn't have to educate our users. It works. We have had zero, or at least close to zero, complaints on the matter. So users do not seem to notice or care whether we process non-time critical or time critical, while both us as a payment service provider and the payment service user are enjoying the benefits that we mentioned before.
Thank you very much, Martijn. Very good knowledge, really very good answer there. Everyone has some insights to think about. Now, Michael, in several fora, you raised the point about the need for market infrastructures to handle payments with a different speed. And you've used an analogy that we need Ferraris, but also trucks to be on the road. Now, could you explain this to everyone? What do you mean by that analogy? And how does it relate to the concept of non-time critical payments addressing a challenge?
Yes, no. Thanks for having me here. I'm happy to explain a bit. As you know, I've been a long time an advocate of, I call it the perfect storm that we're heading into. So given the instant payment regulation, given the fact that we have the European payment instrument, to driving, they all want to rely on the instant payment rails. Maybe go to the analogy, of rails, not Formula 1 tracks, but if all need to ride on that same train rail, can we facilitate, If you look at trains or cars, you have different trains as well. We have intercities, you have high-speed trains, so you want to make a differentiation on that. And in that sense, you want to have the true instant use cases, Attendant, I think, is a good word. Either someone or something, if you look at Internet of Things, is waiting on that result of the payment, That makes the key, and that is the super track we need, for instant payments. Then you have all the other kind of use cases, and I will zoom into a bit like that. That could, benefit as well from the instant payment, functionality. I think it was mentioned that speed is one of the biggest elements of instant payments, but more important, maybe the 24/7 element, to be able to make a payment anywhere, anytime. And most importantly, for a lot of our corporate clients especially, is the feedback of an instant payments. They know exactly if the beneficiary has received the payment or not, which is different than a classic payments, which you only get to know, a couple of days later when no return is sent. Oh, the beneficiary has received the funds. With instant payments, you get immediate, or a little bit later in the case of a non-time critical, maybe, that the beneficiary has received the funds. I think that's crucial, one of the elements to make this work. And when you look as well, heading into this perfect storm, today we have 25 seconds to process a payment. That's the current rule. In October, that will move to 10 seconds and only 3 seconds for the beneficiary bank to process a payment. So if you receive those, the expected loads of payments that we see coming already, the volumes are increasing on a daily basis that we see. So if I'm a beneficiary bank, I would love to identify which payments are truly critical, to kind of scale my systems, and to have that lane that always is on for those payments. And when it's really busy, I have the ability to put some payments for a little bit aside. And because today, if you don't do that, the only thing you would do, because that's a scheme rule, you need to reject. So, and it was said many times, what does the customer want? In the end, he wants to make a payment seamlessly as possible. So if you start rejecting, saying you were a little bit too late with your payment, how to explain this to a customer? So I think this is the key driver for this non-time critical scheme.
Indeed. Thank you, Michael. No, we do not want to clog up the real instant payment where someone is waiting. Now, Carl, I'm turning to you for the next question. And first of all, we're very pleased to have the Swedish market participating in TIPS since February last year. And just to talk about TIPS for the Swedish market, TIPS introduces new functionalities, ensures harmonization, and reduces investment potentially in domestic fragmented solutions. Now I'd like to know from you, how valuable is it for a non-euro market or for a PSP like SEB to have access to TIPS?
Thank you. Well, it's a fairly boring treasury aspect that is the most crucial for us, since TIPS is the accounting is done at the central bank. It takes away all the possible risk concerns and so on, and the finality in the interbank settlement is sort of strictly defined, which allows us to allocate more liquidity, especially in a 24/7 environment, unlike if the settlement occurs on another platform, basically. So this gives us more wiggle room in terms of what products and volumes and values we can process without having to take having any risk concerns on a bank level. So TIPS, we really appreciate that. We run, as you know, the domestic Swedish instant setters on TIPS, not using the standard product, but that worked flawlessly, and we are very happy with the capacity of the system, that it's with the high capacity, and now introducing more products on the platform gives us more opportunities as well. So yeah, regarding this, the TIPS platform is very good out of more sort of hygiene things from a treasury point of view.
Thanks a lot, Carl. Very good, thanks. I'm turning now back to Michael. Michael, you had, following your proposal to set up a task force for non-time critical payments and TIPS, we did so, as you know, and you're part of that. One of your key arguments that you bring forward is that non-time critical payments can help banks from a reputational point of view. And you've spoken a little bit about that already, but we're going to be diving a bit deeper into that. There is, more time to process a higher volume of transaction without potentially facing capacity constraints where you could have rejections for certain types of payments, for example. Now that's really true. And which business cases are you talking about? And how does the Deutsche Bank view the type of business cases that could be applicable to non-time critical payments?
Yeah, so in general, right? So no, let me start. A couple of years back, we already started to offer batches to our customers for instant payments. And this was basically driven of the need for our customers to be able to pay out later the same day than the current cutoff time for the classic flow. So it's not per se that people are unhappy with the current classic processing, because it's very reliable, very certain, but it's just a business need to make those payments later in the day. And using different rails at that moment in time were just too expensive, high value, or even in that sense. So we developed the batch processing for instant payments. And when we started with that, we just went through the batch and sent it out in the infrastructure. And then we saw some issues occurring, let me call it like that. We saw a lot of timeouts happening. So we had to develop a so-called throttling mechanism to allow for not too much payments to go in at once into the industry. And there are multiple reasons why the industry in certain cases could not cope with the volume here, but it really triggered us to think about, hey, do we need potentially different processing types. And in parallel, of course, Netherlands was looking at the non-time critical scheme as well. So yeah, we learned a lot on that, right? How to do that maybe on European level as well. Because in the end, there are clients that do want to use the batch functionality, the unattended way of processing, but do want that on any moment in time, on this non-business day, during evening hours. They just want to make the payments on that moment. Speed is second relevant, right? For that, of course, they expect the speed, but it's more, right, the fact that they can initiate a payment whenever they want and receive the fullback of the processing result within a reasonable amount of time. I think that's the most important use case. And yes, a lot of them, right, could still be facilitated through the classic rails. And the bigger volumes, as much as possible, we would like to keep on the classic rails from efficiency, from a cost perspective. But for those use cases, right, I see a big demand for the non-time critical payment flows.
Thanks a lot, Michael, indeed. So it's really depending on the business case where it makes sense and which rail it goes into. Carl, I'm coming back to you and talking about the evaluation of our change requests that we have lined up for tips. And the SEB gave the highest score to the change request introducing non-time critical payments from a business value perspective. What were the key factors that you had behind that scoring? How do you see non-time critical payments benefiting the Nordic market, especially also in Sweden?
Yeah, our score was mainly based actually on the euro area. We have some branches in Finland and Germany, and we also have euro business in the rest of the group. But we have two sides of this. On the remitting side, we see the value in being able to process large volumes of transactions 24/7 on behalf of our customers without getting this reaction, as Michael mentioned, those timeouts and so on, because that creates issues both for us and our clients. And subsequently on the beneficiary side, we really like to take this timeout risk out of it, so we can prioritize those really instant payments that needs to settle immediately, and then queue up and delay some of those that just needs to settle soon, rather than reject some random transactions here and there. So that's we see that with the instant payment regulation, and that the risk for rejections gets too high, or otherwise it's a cost thing as well. So we will have to pay up for performance in our systems that we might use a few seconds every year, and that doesn't make any sense. So it's a hard, and we think this is a very good middle ground to put the volumes in. And for the Nordic markets, we are in a transition phase from our current legacy ACH products, so into our new, more modernized SEPA-like file solutions at the different ACHs. So this will probably be in scope maybe in a couple of years here in the Nordic markets, since we need to finish the projects that we have already started. But we see the same use cases also in all of the Nordic currencies as well. And I would like to highlight also that as mentioned earlier, the simplest use case is where a corporate who makes large volumes of payments in files, if they have a technical issue that they want to send out a lot of crucial payments, but they can only deliver the instructions fairly late in the afternoon for some issue, and we cannot perform them in the normal SEPA files. We want to be able to do those transactions without having a lot of reactions. So that is a very, very, very important use case for this type of product. The most simple one. Yeah.
No, indeed. Yes, true. Thanks, Carl. Martin, we started with you, and now my last question is for you before we take further questions from our audience. So Martin, skeptics of non-time critical payments often cite the introduction of complexity into their systems as a key concern. Now, after 6 years of experience of Rabobank using the non-time critical, how do you evaluate the trade-off between complexity and the benefits of the non-time critical payments?
Yeah, it's a relevant question. I think the benefit side has been discussed quite extensively already. So from the technical perspective, of course, you need to apply some changes in your systems, right? It's payments infrastructure, so you need to be careful about that. So in a general sense, if I remember correctly, there will be a technical briefing right after. But in a general sense, you'd need to consider identifying your non-time criticals versus time criticals. You would need your non-time criticals to ignore the hard timeout, which is kind of the entire idea behind the NCT processing. And thirdly, you would need, like Michael mentioned, the waiting list or the throttling or the queuing mechanism to also hold and release your payments right in time. So on a very short list there, that would be the key characteristics to consider. From a processing perspective, from the user perspective, I think one of the key elements you need to keep in mind would be making sure that the user, specifically when you talk about private individuals, has the message that the payment is received and it's in process. Because if that message is not displayed and this information is not relayed in an effective way to the user might reinitiate the same payment. And that's the exact scenario that we're trying to avoid. So that would be some of the key elements to consider in that regard. This sounds probably like adding complexity to your systems. In a way, it is. But then again, from our experience, the changes were relatively small. We did combine them with the changes we needed to make for the instant payments processing anyway. So institutions that are moving towards instant only now, or not only now with the IPR, might be able to combine those changes as well. We didn't, or at least I couldn't find the exact figures for back in 2019, but one of the involved analysts did estimate that it was less than 10% of the total effort spent back then relating to the non-time critical addition or overlay or whatever you want to call it. So it's probably less. Fabrizio mentioned a slightly smaller number, I guess, or estimate, but it's in a smaller range of implementation complexity. Lastly, I would also say that it's not necessarily implementation complexity related, but you are removing complexity from your entire operations chain, because rejecting payments lead to questions, lead to interactions with your users. And if you remove or limit the rejected payment amount, you are removing complexity from other pieces of your operations chain. And I don't think you should underestimate that part, as rejected payment follow-up is far more costly in relation to any other form of delayed payment processing, if I could put it that way. So long story short, yes, some complexity, but major benefits, and also a real complexity reducing in your entire payments chain.
Thanks a lot, Martin, for making those very, very relevant points. So no need to be too worried about the implementation complexity. It's minimal, but indeed benefits and reducing complexity on other operational issues. Thank you. So we've reached the end of our questions that we had for you. Now we can have a look. Now we can have a look at the questions that we have received. Now there are a few questions. Perhaps a question about, is the Netherlands implementation in line with the IPR? That was a question put out there. I wonder if anyone would like to take that. Perhaps Martijn or even Michael, that could be something for you.
I'm happy
yes,
to answer, or Martijn, please jump in. Right, the essence of the non-time critical is that in essence it's a credit transfer, not an instant credit transfer, and that's the essence of the procedure. So we try to, let's call it, mimic, right, the advantages and the processing of instant payments, and that's the goal. But in essence, it's a standard credit transfer, right? And that's the essence of a non-time critical payment. So also that means that from the client point of view, as also Martijn said, they initiate a payment or a non-time critical payment. They don't initiate an instant payment per se, right? If that's in your bank, right, you still have the kind of instant payment or indication in your initiation screens that cannot turn into a non-time critical. That needs to follow the full IPR rules. So if you allow customers to initiate, right, a payment or a non-time critical payment, That when we can follow the non-time critical payment flow. And also meaning that in batches, right, clients need to indicate specific, agreed codes. This is a non-time critical batch file. So that's the answer.
Maybe if I can slightly build on that as well, I think Michael answered the question perfectly already from a more technical perspective. I would also try, or at least like to argue, that this way of implementation does really fit into the general thought behind the IPR. So making sure that instant payments are available to as much users or as many users as we can in a way that's actually meeting their requirements, and not that's in a way it's the IPR technically speaking, or SCT technically speaking. But you could argue that making sure it happens and also having a back alley to make sure it happens very closely to the intended scheme is quite in line of the thought, the general goals of the IPR, I would say.
Yeah, the new normal, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
No, thank you very much. So NTC makes the SCT faster, as fast as the SCT Inst in most of the cases, 99+%. All right, thank you very much. And perhaps one more question I'll leave open who would want to take it. Does indicate that sanction screening leads to additional 2 to 3% rejection of instant payments due to false positive hits. Does the NTC suffer from the same problem? Any one want to take that question?
I'm happy to answer
Michael.
a bit. No, fully agree. That's one of the frictions, right? Especially for instant payments, the sanction screening and the obligation, especially for cross-border payments, which makes us still quite unique in the world that we have a cross-border instant payment schemes, right, available in Europe. But it comes with the friction of the sanction screening obligation that all banks have, and especially banks, right, that have operations outside Europe, in the US, and what have you. You're bound to do sanction screening. So as much as we try to bring the rejection or the false positive rate down, but here also NTC gives an opportunity that for certain payments, you can make a choice to look at them, right, and to hold them for a review if needed, right. It's not in the spirit, right, but in those cases where you're on the edge, right, on a hook, how to say that, you have the opportunity to do a little bit more investigation on those transactions. And one point to add, maybe, given also that the amount threshold will be lifted. So that's a very, of course, time critical, right? Also, the higher the amount, the more critical the payment is, right? That's a fact as well. So also there, as a bank, you can make a choice on non-time critical, that from an amount perspective, right, you could still treat them a little bit different, almost like a high value payment. So there's a lot of opportunities to leverage, right, the non-time critical in that respect.
Thank you very much, Michael. And at this point, I see that we have run out of time around our fireside. And I'd like to say thank you very much to our panelists, and we've had a fantastic conversation. I hope it was as valuable to everybody as it was for me. Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the whole panel. Lots of interesting questions answered, and we also got lots in the chat here, but I think we managed to cover most of them. And some are left for Andrea here at the last presentation of the day, so we're not done yet. So thank you to all of you, and Karen especially for moderating this panel.